Okay, next we need to talk about motion, in particular, contrary motion. This is another very crucial step of counterpoint. So there are four kinds of motion. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at, let's take this top line. We're going to assume that's the cantus firmus here, and the line we've written is the bottom line. Okay? So let's look at each of these intervals that we've added as the counterpoint to the cantus firmus and analyze them by the four kinds of motion. So this first one that happens here is the most common type of motion between notes, and that is just simply called contrary motion. We label that with a C in between the two notes. So this is in between the two, right on the bar, so let's just put it right there. Contrary motion means one voice moves up and the other voice moves down. That's all. Now, contrary motion is the most common and the most preferred. It is the best sounding one. It is the kind of motion that makes the whole thing sound the most unified. And this is something that I'd like to point out really quick, that even though, yes, we're talking about counterpoint, we're talking about a very specific kind of music of, this kind of homophonic, simple harmony kind of music. But even if you're writing a pop song, contrary motion sounds good. So this is something that you can think about in any kind of music you're writing, that if you have the opportunity to do contrary motion, it's going to sound pretty good. Now, knowing that the result of the contrary motion has to result in a chord or a harmony that we want, in this case, it adds a third, so that's okay. So we can do it. You can't always get away with contrary motion, which is why we have three other kinds of motion. But the preferred is contrary motion. So let's look at what our next one is. Our next one is also contrary motion. This one goes down, this one goes up. The cantus firmus goes up by a skip, because it's a third, and we go down by a second, but that's okay. Still contrary motion. So let's put a C in between those two to show that they are also contrary motion. Okay, let's go to the next note, and look at this. We're also contrary motion. We've switched directions, where here we're going down by a step, and here we're going up by a skip, but that's okay. This is still contrary motion. This one's going down, this one's going up. That's another example of contrary motion. Okay, now let's go on to the next one. Ooh, interesting here. Not contrary motion. This one's going up, and this one's going up. So that brings us to another type of motion. This one is called parallel motion. Now this is allowed, but it has some additional rules behind it. Parallel motion means we are going in the same direction, both going up here, by the same interval. So we're going up a second and up a second. This one's going up a minor second, this one's going up a major second, but I would still call that parallel motion. It's essentially a third going to another third, right? So that is parallel motion. We label that with a P, and one additional rule about that one is that it is allowed only between imperfect consonances and not between perfect consonances. So we can do a parallel motion with thirds, because that's an imperfect consonant. We can do, and by imperfect, I mean just not perfect, right? We can do parallel motion with sixes. We cannot do parallel motion with fifths, right? If these were both fifths, one fifth going to another fifth in the same direction, we've got problems. That is bad, bad, bad. So we can do parallel motion, but only between imperfect consonances, thirds and sixes.